Apollo-Soyuz, the zero-G handshake when Cold War enemies met in space. Apollo-Soyuz test project was critical in ending the Cold War and dropping the Iron Curtain between the Soviet Union and the United States. The U.S. Space Shuttle program and the International Space Station both resulted from the Apollo-Soyuz test project. When ASTP was first proposed, critics, including congressmen, believed the mission was a major technological giveaway and not safe. They were wrong because the Soviets had access to almost all of our information from magazines, technical journals, and from their spies. 2 years after the Second World War ended, a different type of war, known as the Cold War, was beginning between the Soviet Union, also known as the USSR, and the United States of America. Threats of nuclear warfare were made between the two nations, and both countries saw each other as evil and threatening to the world. The Cold War was also fought in ways other than weapons and military threats. The two nations were engaged in a space race that started with the launch of the Sputnik 1 satellite by Russia. Both sides waged a fierce competition to be the first to beat each other in space. The space race became a symbol of national security and superiority. The Cold War enemies raced to be the first in space achievements. In the U.S., national confidence was low, and it seemed we were losing the race.
Should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
In 1961, President John F. Kennedy declared a race to be the first nation to land a man on the moon. This dramatic goal turned the rivals towards the moon. Ever since the moon landings, the U.S. and the USSR space teams had an interest in a joint space mission. There were reasons why both sides wanted to develop the Apollo-Soyuz test project, or ASTP, including the design for a universal docking system for astronaut rescues in space. The future of manned routine spaceflight and rescue missions could use the hardware and procedures developed for ASTP. However, the most important reason was the leaders of both countries hoped to achieve détente and improve relationships between the superpowers. ASTP became a full-scale project in the summer of 1972 after the Nixon-Kosygin summit agreed on cooperation in space. Both sides were forced to cooperate with their rivals. NASA had many astronauts that wanted to fly the mission, since it was going to be the last Apollo flight, and it was going to be several years before this first space shuttle launch. The Apollo 16 and 17 crews were already in training, and the Skylab crews had been announced. Finally, the American side of the mission was manned by General Thomas P. Stafford as commander, and Donald Deke Slayton and Vance Brand. The Soviets didn't want to name their cosmonauts until 6 months before the launch, but under pressure from the U.S., they finally named Alexei Leonov and Valery Kabosk as the cosmonauts for their side of ASTP. It was obvious that there was a huge language barrier that would have to be overcome. One of the first decisions that was made was that the crews would have to learn to speak the other's language during the mission. Due to General Stafford's strong regional accent, they called what he spoke Oklahomsky. There would be many exchanges of technology and culture between the U.S. and the Soviet astronauts and cosmonauts. The first exchange occurred when the Soviets visited Houston, Texas on July 1973. The Soviet National Security Agents, also known as KGB, were always included in the Soviet delegations to the U.S. The Soviets were stunned to see the quality of life and higher standard of living in the United States. Both countries wanted ASTP to be an exchange of culture. During their multiple trips to the U.S., the cosmonauts asked to see sites like Disney World and Hollywood. The Soviets encountered typical American activities, such as barbecues and rodeos. While they were here, the two teams worked together on docking simulations and technology exchanges. Powerful leaders in the U.S. government were opposed to ASTP as a technological giveaway of our secrets to our enemy. In reality, their spies and our openness towards the media had already informed them of most details of our space program. A critical incident occurred when the astronauts asked to see and to be able to train on the actual Soyuz capsule they'd be docking with. The Kremlin refused to let the Americans come to their top-secret launch site. No Westerner had ever been permitted to see the site, since it also contained military weaponry. It was a standoff. The Americans said they would not go on the mission without seeing inside the Soyuz capsule. So an unusual proposal was brought forth by the U.S. to fly the astronauts into the top-secret area at night so they would only see the Soyuz capsule. There was a great deal of concern in Congress that the Soviet space program was poorly run and not safe. The Soviets, in the past, had covered up and lied about disasters relating to their space program. While ASTP was being developed, the Soviets had to abort a docking with their space station and tried to cover it up. Their refusal to be honest about the failure brought Congress close to the point of ending ASTP. General Stafford convinced the Soviets to admit to their failure and kept ASTP alive. Getting a docking module that would link the two ships was a huge effort by engineers and scientists from both countries. The two countries had developed very different space capsules. Both countries had good reasons for doing it their way, but they were totally different environmentally and could not be mixed. There were two spacecraft came together. They had to figure out how to open a pathway through them while still keeping the pressure in each capsule. After 3 years of intense work and massive expense, the launch went smoothly for both countries on July 17, 1975. Soyuz launched 9 hours before Apollo. Soyuz 19 was the first Soviet space launch ever carried live on television. During the next 40 hours, the two ships would maneuver to get into the same orbit position to dock. The world watched a live historic handshake between Tom Stafford and Alexei Leonov. The next day, each team gave a tour of their spaceship to live audiences worldwide. Together, the astronauts and cosmonauts completed 27 scientific experiments. Soyuz parachuted back to the motherland safely. Apollo experienced severe problems when toxic gas entered the capsule. Swift action by Commander Stafford saved the astronauts' lives. Stafford would later be nominated for the Nobel Prize for his work on the cooperative mission. ASTP was the beginning of the end of the Cold War. It gave the U.S. a better look into the communist government. ASTP helped lead to the destabilization and eventually collapse of the USSR. Now, Americans and Russians have been flying together in space for almost 16 years, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and this would not have been possible without ASTP. The docking module, developed as an exchange of technology for ASTP, had been critical for the future of manned space exploration. The design of the International Space Station and our space shuttle docking with the Russian Mir space station are based on ASTP design, and the two countries began an orbital partnership. This design was proof that engineers in two different countries could work on a design to meet a common goal. ASTP dropped the Iron Curtain and let Americans venture into the closed and top-secret space programs in the Soviet Union. Lifelong friendships would develop between the astronauts and cosmonauts. ASTP made a lasting impact on the world, as manned space missions today still use the technology and ideas exchanged during the mission.